Was normal. Like that's the most honest answer. When I was a child, like there was nothing odd about it. My grandfather was also a polygamist. He had like 70 kids. My uncles also had like 20 kids, 30 kids. Like my best friends were my cousins because we were all in the same church. Yeah, I didn't know any better. It's two different lives. I mean, so one previous life, yeah, on a farm, like around 44 siblings, five parents in a fenced yard, never leaving, the like never going out in public, didn't even go to public school. I mean, now, I'm on my, not my own because I have friends and stuff like that, but now I'm not in a small rural town that was a farm life where I got up every morning, milked the cow, and did garden work. Now I'm in New York City. It's just so different in every capacity. Viewpoints on the world, like then I was super conservative, certainly a lot more. I'm politically homeless, but I'd definitely still say like more left leaning. And Yeah, that's such a big question. If there's any specifics that you have around that, then I can go deeper. But
Tell us a little bit about the part of America in which you grew up. Where was it?
a small town in Utah, so the western states. But yeah, only about fundamentalist Mormonism is relatively small. Some people around the world would have heard of Mormonism, but then and some people even consider that culty. But then there's regular Mormonism, but then there's fundamentalist Mormonism, and it's this secretive underground movement that's been living for 4 generations, like secretly living polygamy, and so yeah, it's just in a small town most people wouldn't have ever heard.
But the point is that growing up in it as a child, you don't know that it's secretive or
Oh, not at
underground.
all. It was totally normal. Yeah, it was totally normal. People ask me all the time, what was that like? And that's a quite insightful thing you just said, because that's what the first react, what was that like? It was normal. Like that's the most honest answer. When I was a child, like there was nothing odd about it. My grandfather was also a polygamist. He had like 70 kids. My uncles also had like 20 kids, 30 kids. Like my best friends were my cousins because we were all in the same church. Yeah, I didn't know any better.
And the schooling you had was provided by the cult.
Not even the cult. The schooling I was provided was my parents. So, in fact, schooling, I don't know why I had the certain DNA that I had out of all of my siblings, but so I was homeschooled. But what that really ended up doing is I had to basically become self-educated. Like, so it just led to my own intellectual curiosities as a teenager, and then that's what led me going to university. And going to university, I'm the first and only one in my family that has done that, because it was very much frowned upon to go to university, because that's going out into the outside world. It's getting exposed to ideas that could damn your soul to hell. So I actually had to convince my dad and grandfather to let me go, which my grandfather's was one of the cult leaders. Um, and that's what kind of kicked everything off. We wouldn't be here today. It was a single philosophy class in college that created the crack in the whole thing. Quite terrifying.
And did your fellow students treat you as an object of curiosity?
No, because we were trained to keep it very secret and quiet. I did not talk about it at all. Like my whole life was secretive. We were raised, because living polygamy, it was illegal, and like having multiple wives was illegal. So we were raised to never talk about it to anybody on the outside world. So if a car came down our dead end street, we were trained to hide behind a bush or run in the house so that they didn't see so many kids and even suspect that it was probably a polygamous house. So I didn't tell anybody.
And your mother, your biological
Biological, yeah, yeah.
mother, what was her? Can you tell us about her status within the family group?
Sure, she was the first mom. She had 12 kids.
Was she the first
That's what I
wife?
mean. Yeah, she was the first of the four.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, but in my family, there wasn't really I mean, it was the dad. He was definitely the hierarchy. He was the one in charge, and then the moms were like below him, and they were all pretty equal as far as status goes. And yeah, and again, it was all in one house. So I have my biological mom, and certainly there's a closer connection with your biological mom, especially when you're young. But the way we were raised is they were all my moms. All four of them were my moms, not just her.
I mean, I just don't understand that
Totally.
dynamic. I mean,
Totally.
it's just
Of
completely
course, why would
baffling.
you? Totally. Yeah. Makes sense.
So, meal times? I mean, take us into your
Okay,
meal
this is how,
times.
well, have you ever watched Harry Potter? I mean, it's just it's just like living at Hogwarts. That's kind of what it feels like to me. Like when I like going in like with big long tables, a big long table. We'd usually do buffet style, so we'd get up after prayer and then just get up in the queue, form a line, get your food, and go sit down. Yeah.
And was there lots of argument?
Oh yeah, for sure. Especially among siblings. Um, so yeah, lots of argument among siblings. In fact, that brings up another point if you're curious about the dynamic of the family, because with that many kids, it almost felt like its own. Like this is me just retroactively looking at it now. It's like its own village where the parents were like the government, and the kids were like the citizens, and so there was like this. There was this kind of distrust in a way where we like the parents could get us in trouble, and so it was the siblings. Yes, we would fight and argue with each other, but also we would kind of cover for each other. Like if one of us were gonna sneak out of the house for any reason, like to go down the street to a McDonald's, and get like that was you could get in a big trouble for something like that, like just leaving the property. um so we would like find ways to cover for each other. But yeah, just like in school, if you're living in school all the time, you're going to have the Malfoys that you just butt heads with, and that's kind of, so I had siblings that I butt heads with, and then
Well, I mean,
others.
there were 43 of them.
44. Yeah, there's 45 of us
44.
total. Yeah.
Okay, right. Forgive me. Sorry, I
Yeah.
just forgot one there, which is probably not that
Yeah, which one?
not that difficult to do.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and do you who did this system suit? I mean, one assumes that it was
Oh,
great for your dad,
of
pretty
course.
horrific for the women.
I mean, I think that's a valid assessment. Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, it all started with this guy, Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is the founder of Mormonism, and uh, there's a lot of controversy around how he started polygamy, but in my upbringing and what is still purported by the communities in which I come from is that polygamy is a divine practice. It is the way to live. In fact, in Mormonism, there's three levels of heaven, and this style of living is the only way you can get to the highest heaven, which of course sounds incredibly convenient. But yeah, like we were taught that, I mean, we came to earth to get to choose good over evil so that we could get back to heaven. And the Bible says to multiply and replenish the earth. So this style of living is how you can multiply and replenish the earth, like have as many babies as possible, get souls here that are just up in heaven waiting to come here, waiting to progress. But that's certainly a very like doesn't take a lot to recognize that point that yeah, it does not, there's not a whole lot of equity there, let's say.
That Yeah, it is very difficult though, isn't it? Because the line between cult and religion is actually pretty blurred for a
For
lot of people.
sure. That's so right. And the way I even like to think of the word cult is even the word cult is not black and white. It's the way I viewed it, having to deconstruct this entire belief system and rebuild is it's like on a sliding scale. And so I like the word culty. Like there's a lot of things that are culty. Like when I left the cult, I left it at first thinking, okay, that's behind me now, and there's nothing else that's culty in the outside world. that's just not the case. There are other things that are culty. It could be something as, yes, other churches, other religions. It could be a yoga studio. you know, like it depends. Like I say that kind of jokingly. Um, but yeah, there is a blur. It's not always obvious what is a cult, what's not a cult.
Your father, was he a tyrant?
Yes. Yeah, unfortunately, I think that's a fair. Yeah, he didn't really. He had a dad in my grandfather who was one of the church leaders that, who was a World War II guy, very rule based, and he was also, my grandfather was very beloved, and I think my dad was never given the skills on how to manage any sort of, if anybody stood up to him or didn't give him the same respect that he was used to seeing people give to his dad. And so, yeah, I, in some ways, I would describe it almost as my family was like a cult within the cult in a way, where, yeah, he was. And it's kind of sad because as life went on, as soon as the kids, you know, could leave the house because they got old or married or moved on, and then just seeing, like, it felt like that he had all this control, and then just seeing how many of them just fled, and the relationships kind of just completely shattered. uh, I mean, it's kind of sad for him in a way, especially as he's getting to the end of his life now.
Have you got a relationship with him?
I do now, yeah. We had a big falling out when I left, a major one, over simple things. Like, I went after I had left for, I was out for a couple of years, and I went back for a family barbecue. And this might seem silly, but I went dressed like this. And in my upbringing, you couldn't ever wear short sleeves. And
So you
so
just had
he,
a T-shirt on. You had a
yeah,
T-shirt and
exactly. I
jeans.
just,
Yeah, okay.
yeah, yeah. And we we essentially got into like a fight in a way. Like, he was really upset that I, was wearing short sleeves, and that wasn't. It was actually the first time any male, especially, had just kind of not. We were taught if he ever was angry or mad at you to just take it like a man. Like, whether you're 4 years old and getting a licking, or you're a 16-year-old and getting a lick, like getting reprimanded as well. And so that broke the relationship for a while. But then a couple of years ago, in 2022, we found out he has uh, stage 4 prostate cancer. And so, at that point, it was just like, when the clock is ticking like that, so much of the past just kind of melts away. And so last summer, we had a rekindling of our relationship, spent a lot of time together in the summer. And in fact, I'm flying out to Utah next Tuesday just to see him, because I don't know how much longer he's going to be here. So that's kind of where things are now.
And of your 44 siblings, how many are still living the same lifestyle?
Actually, a good chunk have technically left. I'd say about half of them are still in it. There and again, this is in stages. It's in, because there's leaving it, as in saying, I don't really want to go along with the tenets of the church. But then but you're still most of them, in fact 99% of them, are still in the bubble, as I would call it, like in the same geographical area with the same social ties. And to me, there's a lot of it still there, even if you're not fully believing it. There's only two of us that are like out, like living somewhere completely different. I have a sister that's in Hawaii with her husband, and I'm in New York City. Everyone else, is in the same place that my family has been for, 4 generations. Um, so yeah, from that perspective, I mean, I'm fascinated at this stage of, human psychology and what makes us do what we do. There's a lot of things that can actually be extrapolated out of what's learned in cult-like environments to the rest of humanity. But it's just fascinating to me. It's really difficult to change, like, your social ties. That was the most difficult part, frankly. People have asked me all the time. In fact, I've collected several ex cult friends that kind of get it. I was just talking with a guy, Moses Storm, that also grew up in a cult. He has a comedy special, and just last weekend, and the one thing we both agreed on is growing up in the cult wasn't the hard part. Back to your point earlier, because we didn't know any different. The hardest part is the waking up to it, but then the leaving it. The leaving it is the most traumatic thing you can imagine, because like we're such social animals, and feeling those, like when I made that decision to leave, it wasn't just it. I mean, 99% of the people I grew up with became estranged overnight, including family members. And so I can't remember exactly what made me start telling that, but that was the most difficult piece.
So I appreciate that you're flying back to see your dad because he's seriously unwell. If you, I hope that doesn't happen, but if you became seriously unwell, would a member of your family come to see you, take care of you, reach out to you?
So I'm close to about four of my siblings. Uh, yeah. So I would like to think they certainly would. The majority of my siblings I'm not that close to. It's surface level, and it's not, and it's kind of a difficult thing, because it's not like you don't have love for people, but when you're, it's literally, I don't know if you're familiar with the old Plato cave story, like the philosopher Plato's allegory of the cave, but when it's kind of like talking to, it's like you were born in a cave and that's all you knew, and so you can relate to other people that are also in the cave, but after you're out of the cave for a while, inside of the cave, not only is it not very appealing, it's very difficult to have those common like things that you can relate on. And even when you try to speak to things that are part of your natural everyday life, if you're speaking with somebody that hasn't been out of it and hasn't gone through that journey, it's just really difficult to have connections that are deep and meaningful.
Yeah. But I guess in a way, even those of us who certainly didn't have experiences as extreme as your own, almost all of us have left home,
Totally.
and it is not entirely dissimilar, is it?
It's not. In fact, that's been one of my favorite parts of the leaving, and also as I've opened up about it and started talking to other people, is I think there are these common threads of humanity in it as well, that are just, again, maybe people can't relate to having 44 siblings, but there are people that certainly can relate to feeling alone, even among people that they're around. They may not have been in a cult that is like a toxic thing above you, but they can relate to, like, I've had people relate, hearing my story, like it feels like a toxic relationship that they were in. Like there's good things and there's bad things. It's not just all bad. And when you're in it, it's difficult to see it. And there's a lot of work leaving out of it. So there's a lot of those things. There's a lot of those things that others that I think connect to, just because.
Yeah. With your experience and from your perspective, how do you view um, the kind of crazy, from my perspective, conspiracy theories that a lot of your fellow citizens seem prepared to buy into?
I'm fascinated by it. I'm not. This is one of the things that I talk about with my friends that are inclined to philosophy and politics and otherwise. I understand it in a way. Like I literally have family that were at Jan 6. Like when it was breaking news on CNN that people were storming the US Capitol, like I had family members that were changing their Facebook profile picture of them climbing the walls. And so I don't know. I have an interesting front row seat to things, because I'm in circles that, you know, are more liberal and left leaning. But yeah, I also know people that believe the earth is flat, and that and that Donald Trump was the second coming of Jesus, and and on the surface, it's like, how could anybody believe X, Y, and Z? But if you can sit with it for 20 minutes to an hour, you can actually start to peel the layers back and understand it a little bit as to why it comes up. And I don't know how much time we have around that, but again, from my vantage point, it's genuinely fascinating to me to see what people fall into, but to see how people came to their conclusions on that side and other sides, because, you know, New York City, it definitely has a lot of diversity, but it also, it, it doesn't, it's not, it, every single person in New York City isn't necessarily fully educated on every issue either.
Well, trust me, it's the same in London, Calvin. So you don't need you don't need to
Cool.
apologise. That's so interesting. Thank you so much for your time.